The cabin barely shows up until the last turn in the dirt road. From a distance, it looks more like a stack of old lumber leaning into the trees than a house. The roofline sits low beneath the hardwood canopy, and in October, when the leaves start dropping across eastern Kentucky, the place almost disappears completely. There's no cell service out here, not reliably anyway. A few miles down the mountain, near the edge of Daniel Boone National Forest, people still talk about the old mining roads that cut through these hills decades ago. Most of them lead nowhere now. One of them leads here. The cabin belongs to 41-year-old Eric Madden, a former hospital billing coordinator from Knoxville, who spent nearly 15 years working under fluorescent lights before moving into the woods full-time. The strange part is that he still keeps banker's hours. Most mornings, he wakes up around 6, makes coffee on a propane stove, and sits at a narrow plywood desk answering remote insurance emails while fog drifts through the trees outside the window. His laptop runs off a small solar setup mounted on a rack behind the cabin. On cloudy winter weeks, he watches the battery numbers constantly. He still wears collared shirts while he works, even out here. The cabin itself is smaller than most studio apartments, just under 320 square feet. One main room, a sleeping loft, a narrow bathroom, and a covered porch Eric added later after realizing how much rain moves sideways through these mountains. The entire build cost around $11,200 over 2 years. A lot of the wood came from abandoned barns nearby. Some of it still carries faded paint marks and old nail holes. The kitchen counter used to be part of a bowling alley lane salvaged from a closed recreation center in Tennessee. Eric likes pointing that out to visitors, even though almost nobody comes up here. He has a habit of collecting broken watches from flea markets. None of them work. There are at least 14 sitting in jars around the cabin. He says he likes how they all stopped at different times. The first winter nearly pushed him out. The wood stove was too small. Snow drifted under the door. One pipe froze solid after 3 nights below zero, and he ended up hauling melted snow in buckets just to flush the toilet. At one point, he slept in thermal layers inside a sleeping bag directly beside the stove because the loft trapped cold air worse than he expected. There's still a faint smoke stain above one corner of the ceiling from the chimney mistake he made that year. The place isn't polished, that's obvious within a few minutes. The floor creaks loudly near the sink because the joist spacing was measured wrong early in the build. One cabinet door hangs slightly crooked. Half the shelves don't match. Outside, a section of rain gutter is held together with wire and black tape that's been there longer than temporary repairs are supposed to last. But the systems work, mostly. Rainwater gets collected from the roof into 2 large food-grade tanks uphill from the cabin. Gravity feeds the water down through a basic filter setup. In dry stretches during late summer, he still drives into town with plastic containers in the back of his truck, just in case. Electricity is limited enough that routines form naturally around it. Laundry waits for sunny days. Power tools get used carefully in winter. Eric stopped using a toaster altogether because it pulled too much energy compared to everything else he needed. There's a small chest freezer outside in an insulated storage box because he learned regular refrigerators cycled too often for the battery bank. At night, the cabin gets quiet in a way that takes adjustment. Not peaceful exactly, just very still. Branches scrape the roof sometimes. Coyotes echo through the valley. Once, a black bear ripped apart the latch on his outdoor trash bin and dragged halfway into the woods. Eric rebuilt the latch using a section of old chain and a trailer hook. It worked better than the original. Before moving here, he rented a 2-bedroom apartment beside a highway in Knoxville and spent most evenings sitting in traffic between work and home. Around the same time his father got sick, Eric started driving out into rural areas on weekends just to sit somewhere quieter for a few hours before returning to the city. After his father died, the apartment suddenly felt temporary in a way it hadn't before. Not unbearable, just strange. He didn't leave everything immediately. The transition happened slowly enough that some people around him barely noticed at first. He bought the land first, then a used camper, then weekends turned into longer stays. Eventually, he realized he was spending more time here than anywhere else. He still drives into town every Thursday for groceries, propane, and internet strong enough to upload work files. Sometimes he stays longer than necessary just to be around other people for a while. That part surprised him. For someone who wanted solitude, he talks more openly now about loneliness than he ever did before moving here. There are practical trade-offs everywhere in the cabin. Summer humidity curls the wood trim around the windows. Mice occasionally get into the insulation under the floor. During heavy rain, the sound on the metal roof gets loud enough that phone calls become difficult. And there's mud. Constantly. Mud on the porch, mud on the boots, mud tracked inside despite efforts to keep the place clean. In spring, the road becomes soft enough that Eric sometimes parks downhill and hikes back up in multiple trips. Still, there's a rhythm to the place now that seems settled. By late afternoon, sunlight reaches through the trees onto the west side of the cabin, where Eric keeps a small garden built from cinder blocks and scrap wood. Tomatoes do well some years. Other years, the deer get there first. Most evenings end the same way. A small fire outside, if the weather's dry. Dishes washed by hand. Laptop shut around sunset to conserve power. Then quiet again. Not every day out here feels meaningful. A lot of it is maintenance, splitting wood, fixing leaks, cleaning ash from the stove, watching weather forecasts more carefully than most people probably do. But somewhere in the middle of all those repetitive routines, the place became less like an experiment and more like an ordinary life, just one that happens to be hidden in the Appalachian forest. There are hundreds of cabins scattered through these mountains, some abandoned, some rented out on weekends, some occupied full-time by people who stopped explaining themselves years ago. Most drivers pass straight through these roads without noticing any of them.